People always ask me when I realized I wasn't really part of my own family anymore. Some think it happened after my parents chose my sister over me. Some think it happened because I never went to college. They're all wrong. My family had been measuring my worth by my job for years. I was simply the last person to realize the score had already been decided. If you enjoy emotional family stories, family betrayal, and unforgettable journeys where the truth finally comes to light, subscribe now. We share stories like this every week. And I promise what happened at one Thanksgiving dinner changed my family forever. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 41 years old. I own a plumbing company in Columbus, Ohio. Most days you'll find me underneath someone's kitchen sink, standing knee-deep in a flooded basement, or helping an elderly neighbor whose water heater decided to quit on the coldest day of the year. It's not glamorous. I know that. I've come home covered in mud, covered in dust, sometimes covered in things I'd rather not describe. But every paycheck I've ever earned came from honest work. I've always been proud of that. Unfortunately, my family wasn't. My younger sister Lauren was everything my parents loved talking about. She had a marketing degree, a downtown office, designer clothes, business trips, a corner office by the time she turned 35. Every holiday dinner somehow became another celebration of Lauren's latest promotion. Another toast, another speech, another reason to remind everyone how successful she was. When relatives asked what I was doing, the room always became quieter. "Oh," my mother would say with an awkward smile. "Emily's still doing plumbing." As if I hadn't built a business. As if I hadn't employed 6 people. As if I spent my days playing with toy wrenches instead of running a company. I stopped correcting people years ago. Dad wasn't cruel. Not intentionally. He simply followed Mom's lead. If she praised Lauren, he praised Lauren. If she dismissed me, he stayed quiet. Sometimes silence hurts more than words. I'd learned not to expect much. Birthday calls that lasted 3 minutes. Christmas gifts that looked like something grabbed from the clearance aisle. Forgotten invitations. Last-minute changes. After a while, you stop wondering why. You just adjust your expectations. The Monday before Thanksgiving, I was replacing a broken water line at an elementary school. My phone buzzed inside my jacket. "Mom." I smiled. Maybe, just maybe, she was calling to ask what pie I planned to bring. I'd made pumpkin cheesecake every Thanksgiving for almost 15 years. Dad always asked for seconds. I answered. "Hi, Mom." Her voice sounded strangely nervous. "Hi, sweetheart. I hope I'm not interrupting. I'm working. But I can talk." She hesitated. "I wanted to tell you something before you heard it from someone else." A knot formed in my stomach. What happened? "It's about Thanksgiving." I waited. "So, what time should I come?" Silence. Long enough for me to pull the phone away and make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then, Mom sighed. "I don't think it's a good idea this year." I laughed. "What do you mean?" Another pause. "Lauren is bringing someone. A new boyfriend. She wants him to meet the family." "That's wonderful." I smiled despite myself. "I can't wait to meet him." More silence. Then, "Emily, Lauren asked if you wouldn't come." The wrench slipped from my hand. It hit the concrete floor with a loud clang. For a moment, I thought I'd misunderstood. "I'm sorry." Mom lowered her voice. "She thinks. Well, first impressions are important." I frowned. "I don't understand." "She doesn't want." Mom struggled to finish the sentence. "Any distractions?" Distractions? What does that even mean? Mom spoke so quietly I almost didn't hear her. She said your job might give him the wrong impression. I felt the air leave my lungs. My job. She thinks. Mom swallowed. That it might embarrass her. The school hallway suddenly felt freezing cold. Even though the boiler beside me was running, I leaned against the wall, trying to make sense of what I just heard. Embarrass her? Because I'm a plumber? Mom rushed to explain. It isn't like that. He's an attorney. He comes from a very successful family. Lauren just wants everything to go smoothly. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because sometimes laughter is all that's left when your heart doesn't know what else to do. So let me see if I understand. My own parents are uninviting me from Thanksgiving. Because my sister thinks fixing broken pipes isn't good enough? Emily, please don't make this harder. Harder. I looked down at my work boots. The ones I'd bought after 12-hour days crawling through crawl spaces. The ones that paid my mortgage, built my business, fed my employees' families. Those boots had never embarrassed me. Not once. I won't make it harder, I said quietly. I won't come. Mom let out a relieved breath. Thank you for understanding. Understanding. That word echoed in my ears long after she'd hung up. She thanked me for accepting my own rejection. I finished the repair that afternoon. I smiled at the school principal, loaded my truck, drove home, and cried the entire way. Not because I'd missed turkey, or pumpkin pie, or football on television. I cried because somewhere along the way, my own family had decided I wasn't someone they were proud to claim. Thanksgiving morning arrived. For the first time in my life, I had nowhere to be. No casserole to bake. No table to help set. No family waiting for me. I made myself a grilled cheese sandwich, watched the Macy's parade alone, and tried not to think about the empty chair that had probably already been filled by someone else. Around 2 o'clock, I opened Facebook. It was a mistake. There they were. Mom, Dad, Lauren, a handsome man in a navy blazer standing beside her. Everyone smiling. Everyone raising glasses. The caption read, "So thankful to have the whole family together." The whole family. I stared at those 4 words until the screen blurred. Apparently, I wasn't part of the whole family. Not anymore. I closed the app, turned off my phone, and spent the rest of the afternoon convincing myself I didn't care. The next morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it and said, I answered. Hello. A man's voice came through the speaker. Is this Emily Carter? Yes. There was a brief pause. My name is Daniel Foster. My stomach tightened. I think, he said carefully, I'm the reason you weren't invited to Thanksgiving. I closed my eyes. I figured. His next word stopped me cold. I'm so sorry. I didn't know you existed until dessert. I gripped the phone a little tighter. I'm sorry. I think I heard you wrong. The man on the other end spoke gently. My name is Daniel Foster. I'm Lauren's boyfriend. I was at your parents' house yesterday. I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure I trusted myself to speak. He continued. I didn't know you existed until dessert. I frowned. That's impossible. My parents have 2 daughters. I know. That's what I thought too. His voice carried the same confusion I'd been feeling since Thanksgiving morning. But all afternoon, they only talked about Lauren. They showed me family photos, vacation pictures, graduation pictures. When I asked if she had any brothers or sisters, he paused. They said she was an only child. I closed my eyes. It shouldn't have hurt. After everything that had happened, it shouldn't have surprised me. But somehow, it did. They actually said that? Yes. I didn't find out the truth until much later. I leaned against my kitchen counter. How? There was a long silence. Then Daniel answered. Your father. Dad. After dinner. Everyone else was cleaning up. Your father asked if I'd help him carry a few boxes down to the basement. I could picture it perfectly. Dad hated carrying anything heavier than a grocery bag these days. When we got downstairs, Daniel continued. I noticed an old framed photograph sitting on a shelf. It was dusty, but I could tell it had been displayed somewhere for a long time. I frowned. What photograph? You. My heart skipped. It was a picture of a teenage girl wearing blue coveralls, holding a huge trophy. Your father smiled when he saw me looking at it. He said. Daniel's voice softened. That's my Emily. A lump formed in my throat. I'd almost forgotten about that picture. I was 17. I'd won Ohio's statewide vocational skills competition. Dad had been so proud. He'd framed the newspaper clipping himself. I asked him who Emily was. What did he say? He looked surprised. He said, my oldest daughter. I closed my eyes. So he remembered. Daniel sounded puzzled. He looked confused. He asked why I was asking. I told him. Lauren told me she was an only child. My stomach twisted. What happened? I've never seen someone's face change so quickly. He looked upstairs, as if he didn't want anyone to hear. Then he asked me one question. Did Emily really not come today? I felt tears burning behind my eyes. Dad hadn't known. At least, not completely. I told him I'd never met you. I said I thought Lauren didn't have any siblings. He just sat down on the basement steps. For almost a minute. He didn't say anything. Finally, he looked at me and quietly said, "She should have been here." The words hit me harder than I expected. She should have been here. It wasn't an apology, but it was the first acknowledgement I'd heard from anyone in my family. Daniel continued, "Your father told me you own a plumbing company. He said you built it yourself. He told me you've worked harder than anyone he knows." I smiled through my tears. Dad said that. He did. So why didn't he invite me? Daniel sighed. I asked him the same thing. What did he say? He said, "Sometimes keeping the peace feels easier than doing the right thing." I wiped my eyes. That sounded exactly like Dad. Never cruel. Just afraid of conflict. Afraid of standing up to Mom. Afraid of standing up to Lauren. "I'm sorry." Daniel said it again. "I should have realized something was wrong sooner. It isn't your fault. I still feel responsible. You aren't. You walked into someone else's family. You couldn't have known." He hesitated. "Actually, there was something else." "What?" "After your father told me about you, I asked Lauren why she'd lied. My heart started racing. What did she say?" "She laughed." "Laughed?" "She said Emily wouldn't fit in." I felt my chest tighten. Daniel continued. "She said she owns a plumbing company. She spends all day unclogging toilets. That's not exactly the image I'm trying to create." For a second, I couldn't breathe. Those weren't my mother's words. Those weren't assumptions. Those were Lauren's. My own sister had said them. Without hesitation. Without shame. I asked her another question. Daniel said quietly, "What?" I asked whether you'd ever done anything to hurt her. And she said no. So I asked, "Then why are you ashamed of your sister?" Silence. She didn't answer. And said, "According to Daniel." Lauren rolled her eyes, picked up her wine glass, and said something that neither of us would ever forget. "Some people are just meant to stay in the background." I covered my mouth. The words felt almost unreal. Not because they were unbelievable, because they explained so much. Every forgotten birthday, every awkward introduction, every time she'd introduced me as my sister, without ever mentioning my name, without ever mentioning my business, without ever mentioning that I had built something from nothing. "What happened then?" I asked. Daniel let out a slow breath. I stood up. I looked around the table. Your parents. Lauren. Her grandparents. An aunt and uncle. Everyone. No one said a word. I couldn't stay quiet. So I said. His voice became firm. "I think everyone here deserves to know the truth." I held my breath. "What truth?" I told them that I knew about you. I told them your father had shown me your picture. I told them I'd spent the last 15 minutes reading about your company. I blinked. "You looked me up?" I did. I found dozens of 5-star reviews. Pictures of projects you'd completed. Articles about the free plumbing repairs your company does every Christmas for elderly homeowners. I laughed softly through my tears. "We've done that for years." "I know." I also found that you'd won Small Business of the Year from the Columbus Chamber of Commerce. I smiled. "I never told my family. I figured that out." Daniel paused. "Do you know what surprised me most?" "What?" None of them seemed to know any of it. The silence that followed hurt more than anything. Not because my family disliked my work. Because they had never cared enough to ask about it. I looked at Lauren. Daniel continued. And I asked, "Why would you hide someone like Emily?" He paused. When she answered, I realized Thanksgiving was over. I swallowed hard. What did she say? Daniel took a slow breath, then quietly replied, because if they admired her, they might stop admiring me. I sat there long after the call ended. My coffee had gone cold. The leftovers from Thanksgiving sat untouched in the refrigerator, and all I could think about was one sentence. If they admired her, they might stop admiring me. I never imagined my sister saw life as a competition. I certainly never imagined she thought I was winning. For years, I'd envied Lauren. The college degree, the polished career, the beautiful clothes, the family dinners where everyone celebrated her accomplishments. I thought she had everything. Apparently, she'd spent all those years looking over her shoulder at me. My phone buzzed again. A text message. It was from Daniel. I owe you more than an apology. Can we meet? I stared at the screen. I barely knew this man. He wasn't the one who had hurt me. But somehow, he was the only person who seemed interested in hearing my side. After a moment, I replied, tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, Riverside Cafe. That night, I barely slept. Every memory kept replaying itself. Lauren refusing to tell classmates I was her sister in high school. Mom introducing me at church as our handy daughter. Relatives asking Lauren about work, then turning to me and asking if business was keeping me busy. I used to think they simply didn't understand what plumbers did. Now, I wondered if they'd only been told part of the story. The next morning, I arrived 10 minutes early. Riverside Cafe was quiet. The smell of fresh cinnamon rolls filled the room. I ordered coffee, sat near the window, and watched people hurry through the cold November morning. At exactly 9, Daniel walked in. He looked just as polished as he had in the Thanksgiving photos. Navy overcoat, pressed shirt, leather briefcase. But his expression wasn't confident. It was embarrassed. He walked over. Emily. I stood. We shook hands. I'm glad you came. So am I. For a few moments, neither of us knew where to begin. Finally, he spoke. I don't think I've ever left a family dinner feeling ashamed. You shouldn't. I wasn't ashamed of myself. He looked down. I was ashamed of what I watched. The waitress brought our coffee. Neither of us touched it. Daniel reached into his briefcase. I wanted you to see something. He handed me his phone. It was Lauren's social media profile. I'd stopped looking at it years ago. There were pictures from expensive restaurants, business conferences, vacations, designer handbags, holiday parties. Everything looked perfect. Then he opened another album. Pictures from Thanksgiving. There they were. Mom, Dad, Lauren, Daniel. Everyone smiling. I recognized the dining room immediately. It looked exactly as I remembered. Except, something caught my attention. The chair beside my father. My chair. It was empty. No place setting. No plate. No glass. Nothing. I frowned. You mean? Daniel nodded. They never planned for you to come. A strange feeling settled over me. Yesterday, I told myself maybe the decision had been made at the last minute. Maybe Mom had been pressured. Maybe there had been an argument. Maybe someone felt guilty. But that empty chair told a different story. There had never been a chair. Because there had never been an invitation. Daniel quietly said, I noticed your father kept looking toward that side of the table. I looked at him. He did. Several times. I thought he was distracted. Now. He shook his head. I think he knew someone was missing. I smiled sadly. Dad always sat across from me. He'd steal olives off my plate when Mom wasn't looking. Daniel smiled. He talked about you. He did. When everyone else went upstairs. He reached into his coat pocket. I hope you don't mind. I wrote something down before I forgot it. He unfolded a small piece of paper. Your father said. Daniel read slowly. Emily fixes things. Broken pipes. Broken water heaters. Broken furnaces when she can. She spent her whole life fixing things. I swallowed hard. Daniel continued. I just wish I'd been better at fixing this family. The tears came instantly. Dad had known. Maybe not everything. But enough. Enough to know he'd failed me. Daniel folded the paper. I've represented people in court for almost 15 years. I've met dishonest people, manipulative people, selfish people. He looked me in the eyes. But yesterday was the first time I watched good people stay silent because telling the truth would have been uncomfortable. I nodded. That sounds like my parents. He sighed. I ended things with Lauren. I blinked. You did. That night. What happened? He looked out the window. When everyone left the table, I asked her one last question. What was it? If Emily became a lawyer tomorrow, would you suddenly be proud to call her your sister? I waited. She didn't answer. He gave a sad smile. She didn't have to. For several moments, we sat quietly. Finally, I asked the question I'd been wondering since yesterday. Why did you call me? Daniel answered without hesitation. Because someone should have. I looked down into my coffee. You don't owe me anything. I know. But your parents do. Before I could respond, the bell above the cafe door rang. I glanced up. My heart stopped. Mom walked inside. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept. She spotted me immediately. Then she noticed Daniel sitting across from me. Her face turned white. She slowly walked toward our table. She looked at Daniel first, then at me, and in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked the one question I never expected to hear. Emily, can you ever forgive me? For a moment, I couldn't answer. I simply stared at my mother. She looked smaller than I remembered. The confident woman who had always controlled every holiday dinner, every birthday, every family gathering, now stood in the middle of a crowded cafe with tears filling her eyes. She looked lost. Daniel quietly pushed back his chair. I'll give you two some privacy. I reached out and touched his arm. You don't have to leave. He gave me a gentle smile. I think this conversation belongs to the two of you. He nodded politely to my mother, then walked toward the door. Before leaving, he looked back at me. If you need anything, you have my number. Then he was gone. Mom remained standing. May I sit down? I looked at the empty chair across from me. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Yesterday, there hadn't been a chair for me. Today, I was the one deciding whether there would be one for her. After a long pause, I nodded. She sat quietly. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, she whispered, I've never been so ashamed of myself. I looked out the cafe window. I wish that sentence had been spoken yesterday. She nodded. So do I. The waitress walked over. Can I get you anything? Mom shook her head. No, thank you. Her voice trembled. I don't think I could swallow anything right now. She folded her hands together. I owe you the truth. I waited. No interruptions. No accusations. Just silence. Fun. She didn't deserve to be interrupted. When Lauren started dating Daniel, she became obsessed. She kept talking about his family, his law firm, his friends, his clients. Mom wiped at her eyes. She wanted everything to be perfect. So she asked you not to invite me. Mom nodded. At first, I told her absolutely not. I frowned. You did. Yes. I told her Thanksgiving wasn't negotiable. Hope flickered inside me, then disappeared. What changed? Mom lowered her head. She cried. She said if I loved her, I'd support her. She said it was just one dinner. Just one afternoon. She promised she'd explain everything afterward. I let out a slow breath. So you chose her? She nodded. Yes, I did. The honesty caught me off guard. She wasn't making excuses. She wasn't blaming anyone else. She was simply admitting it. I've spent the last 24 hours asking myself why. She looked directly at me. I don't think I liked the answer. What was it? She closed her eyes. I've always worried about appearances. I cared too much about what other people thought. I thought Lauren represented the life I'd imagined for my daughters. And without realizing it, I treated you like the daughter who'd settled. Her words hurt. Not because they were cruel, because they were true. I never settled. My voice was calm. I chose a different path. She nodded. I know. I just didn't see it. You know what hurts the most? I asked. She slowly shook her head. I wasn't embarrassed by my job. You were. A tear rolled down her cheek. Yes, I was. 4 years. I'd waited to hear those words. Not because I wanted to be right. Because I wanted someone to finally acknowledge what I'd always felt. Mom reached into her purse. I brought something. She placed a folded envelope on the table. What's this? I found it yesterday. I opened it. Inside was an old newspaper clipping. Yellow with age. Carefully folded. Across the top, a photograph of a 17-year-old girl wearing oversized blue coveralls. Me. Smiling so hard my cheeks looked ready to burst. The headline read, Local Student Wins State Plumbing Championship. I laughed softly through my tears. Dad framed this. She nodded. I took it down. I looked up. When? Years ago. Why? She couldn't meet my eyes. I thought. She swallowed. It looked out of place next to Lauren's college diploma. The words landed harder than I expected. Not because of the newspaper. Because of what it represented. She hadn't just taken down a picture. She'd taken down the one moment I'd felt my parents were truly proud of me. I found it in the basement yesterday. She continued. Your father never threw it away. He kept it. He dusted it. He didn't put it back. That sounded exactly like Dad. Quietly protecting something. Quietly avoiding another argument. I smiled sadly. He always hated conflict. Mom nodded. I made it easy for him to stay silent. For the first time, I realized something. Dad hadn't been choosing between us. He'd been choosing peace. Over and over again. Until peace cost him his relationship with me. Mom reached across the table. I can't change yesterday. I can't undo years of favoritism. I can't ask you to pretend it never happened. She took a shaky breath. But I can stop pretending it didn't. I looked at her hand, then at mine. 4 years. I wanted this conversation. Now that it was happening, I wasn't sure what I felt. Anger, relief, sadness, maybe all three. My phone buzzed. It was Dad. Just 3 words. Please come home. I showed the message to Mom. She quietly nodded. He's been waiting. For what? She looked at me with tears in her eyes. To tell you something he should have said years ago. An hour later, I parked in front of the house where I'd grown up. Everything looked exactly the same. The white porch swing. The oak tree Dad planted when I was 10. The flower beds Mom never let anyone else touch. But somehow, the house felt different. Not because it had changed. Because I had. Dad opened the front door before I could knock. His eyes were red. Like he'd been crying. Without saying a word, he stepped aside. Come in. I walked into the dining room. The Thanksgiving table was still there. The dishes had been cleared away. But 4 place settings remained. Except this time, there was a 5th plate. Carefully placed in the empty space where I should have been sitting all along. Dad looked at me. His voice cracked. That chair. It should never have been empty. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet jewelry box, and said something that made me forget how to breathe. I've been saving this for you for 20 years. I stared at the small velvet box in my father's hand. For a second, I couldn't even process what I was looking at. Dad, what is it? His fingers trembled as he opened the lid. Inside wasn't a necklace or a ring. It was a simple silver key. Attached to it was a worn brass tag. The tag had one word engraved on it. Shop. I looked up at him. The old workshop? He nodded. When you were 16, you spent every Saturday out there. I smiled through my tears. I practically lived in that building. The detached garage behind my parents' house wasn't much to look at. It leaked whenever it rained. The heater barely worked. But Dad had filled it with tools over the years. It was where he taught me how to repair faucets, replace valves, solder copper pipe, build shelves, fix lawnmowers. If something was broken, that's where we fixed it. Those afternoons with Dad were some of the happiest memories of my childhood. I was going to give you the key after you started your business. He looked down. But your mother thought. He stopped himself. Mom quietly finished the sentence. I thought Lauren would be offended. Dad nodded sadly. So I put it away. For 20 years. I looked back at the key. It wasn't worth much. But somehow, it meant more than anything expensive he could have bought me. It represented the one place I'd always felt accepted. I'm sorry, Dad whispered. I let silence become my excuse. I kept telling myself I'd fix things later. Then later became years. His voice broke, and I almost lost my daughter because I was afraid of difficult conversations. I stepped forward. For the first time in years, I hugged him. Not because everything was suddenly okay. Because I could feel how deeply he regretted what he'd allowed to happen. He held on tightly. I'm proud of you. He whispered the words into my shoulder. I've always been proud of you. I just didn't say it often enough. When we finally pulled apart, Mom was crying openly. So am I, she said. I was wrong. I measured success by titles. I measured people by appearances. And I almost destroyed my family because of it. Before I could answer, the front door opened. Lauren walked in. She froze the moment she saw me. None of us had expected her. She looked exhausted. Her makeup was gone. Her hair was pulled into a messy ponytail. For the first time in years, she looked less like the polished executive everyone admired, and more like my little sister. Nobody spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. Daniel left me. Dad nodded once. I know. Lauren looked at me. I'm sorry. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to punish her. Because I honestly didn't know what to say. She took a deep breath. I've been jealous of you for years. I blinked. You've got to be kidding. She shook her head. I'm not. I thought Mom and Dad loved me more. But every time something broke, they called you. When the neighbors needed help, they called you. When Grandma's pipes burst, you left work and drove across town. When Dad slipped on the ice, you stayed at the hospital. You always showed up. She wiped away a tear. I kept thinking, if people saw who you really were, they'd realize I wasn't the impressive one. I stared at her. So instead, you pretended I didn't exist. She nodded. Yes. I told myself it was only one holiday. But if I'm honest, I've been trying to push you into the background for years. The room fell silent. Mom covered her face. Dad looked at the floor. Nobody argued with Lauren. Because nobody could. I finally asked the question that had been sitting in my heart for years. Why? She laughed bitterly. Because I built my entire identity around looking successful. And you. She looked directly at me. You never cared what anyone thought. I mistook that for failure. When it was actually confidence. I let those words settle. Then I quietly said, I cared. Everyone looked at me. I cared every birthday you forgot. I cared every Christmas I watched you open thoughtful gifts, while I got whatever was left. I cared every time Mom introduced you as the successful daughter. And introduced me as the plumber. I cared. I just stopped telling you because it never changed anything. Lauren began crying. Real crying. Not the controlled tears she'd used to win arguments growing up. The kind that leave you unable to speak. I'm sorry. She whispered. I know. I answered. But an apology doesn't erase years. She nodded. I know. Dad pulled out the dining room chairs. All 5 of them. He looked around the room. This family has spent enough time standing on opposite sides. He motioned toward the table. Please. We sat down. Not for another Thanksgiving dinner. Just coffee, leftover pie, and the hardest conversation we'd ever had. For nearly 3 hours. No one defended themselves. No one raised their voice. Mom admitted how often she'd compared us. Dad admitted that keeping the peace had been easier than standing up for me. Lauren admitted she'd confused admiration with love. And I admitted something I'd never said out loud. I stopped believing I belonged here. That sentence broke whatever walls were left. The months that followed weren't perfect. Healing rarely is. Mom started coming by my office every Friday with lunch. First, it felt awkward. Then, it became something I looked forward to. Dad spent weekends helping me renovate the old workshop behind their house. We replaced the roof, installed better lighting, built new workbenches. For the first time in decades, we were fixing something together again. Lauren didn't expect instant forgiveness. She called occasionally. Sometimes I answered. Sometimes I didn't. She understood. When Christmas came, she asked if she could come to my company's annual free plumbing day for senior citizens. I almost said no. Then I remembered something Dad had taught me in that old workshop. Some things deserve to be repaired, if both sides are willing to do the work. Lauren spent the entire day carrying toolboxes, cleaning up job sites, and serving hot coffee to homeowners waiting for repairs. Nobody there knew she was a corporate executive. Nobody cared. At the end of the day, she looked happier than I'd seen her in years. The following Thanksgiving, I arrived at my parents' house carrying my usual pumpkin cheesecake. Dad opened the door before I reached the porch. He smiled. "You're late." I laughed. "By 3 minutes." He leaned closer. "I saved your chair." Inside, the table was already set. 5 place settings. Exactly where they belonged. Mom hugged me before I could put the dessert down. Lauren walked over and quietly said, "I'm really glad you're here." This time, I believed her. People sometimes ask whether I forgave my family. The answer is yes. Not because they deserved it immediately, because they earned it over time. With honesty, consistency, and changed behavior. Forgiveness isn't pretending the hurt never happened. It's deciding the future doesn't have to be held hostage by the past. I still own my plumbing company. I still come home with dirty boots. Still crawl under sinks. Still fix broken pipes. And every single day, I'm reminded that there's honor in honest work. No job that helps other people is something to be ashamed of. The people who truly matter will never judge you by how clean your hands are at the end of the day. Only by what those hands were willing to do for someone else. And after everything my family and I went through, that's the lesson all of us finally learned. If this story touched you, let me know in the comments. What would you have done if your own family had uninvited you from Thanksgiving? And if you enjoy heartfelt family stories about betrayal, forgiveness, and justice that feels real, don't forget to subscribe. There are many more stories to come.